The ATF has a long history of shady dealings. I know that, you know that, anyone who's heard of Waco or Ruby Ridge knows that. But in researching another recent video, I stumbled upon a series of reports that surprised even me. Reports that the ATF also has a regular practice of seeking out mentally disabled and brain-injured informants, manipulating them into working for the ATF, and then arresting them for that work. Classy. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. This all started with a 2013 investigation and expose that revealed that the ATF had, and probably still has, a habit of using mentally disabled and brain-injured people, sometimes teenagers, in their sting operations, and then charging them with crimes. A 2016 report found that, despite some slaps on the wrist, the ATF was still using these same practices and violating disabilities laws. The ATF argued that they had no idea that the men they were using had disabilities, despite some of them having an IQ in the 50s, a number that used to be in the DSM and ICD as demonstrative of mild to moderate mental retardation. They've changed the label to intellectual disability and divorced the IQ numbers from the diagnosis in the DSM-5, but the fact remains, these men's disabilities were severe enough that the ATF should have noticed, or at the very least recognized them as kindred spirits. And these men's disabilities were so severe that in some cases the prosecution actually said, we can't send these guys to prison because they won't survive it. What's worse is that it turns out that the ATF isn't the only agency doing this. According to the Office of the Inspector General, it turned out the DEA and FBI were doing the same thing. But this video is about the ATF, so we will only be talking about the ATF's role in these shenanigans. But before we get into that, this video is brought to you by Blackout Coffee Company. Blackout has been supporting this channel for a long time now and has been supporting your rights for even longer than that. They have great, amazing, smooth coffee in all kinds of flavors, tea and hot chocolate, have added instant coffee to their lineup, and have dedicated partner roasts that raise money for GOA, FPC, and the Second Amendment Foundation. So to get a cup of coffee that you can be proud of and help support the channel, go to blackoutcoffee.com/libertydoll, and as a bonus, you can use code libertydoll for a one-time 20% discount. All right, so let's dive right in with the first example that cracked this thing wide open. The Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel led their expose with the story of a store calling itself Fearless Distributing that opened in the city in 2012 under ATF's Operation Fearless. The store sold designer clothes, sneakers, jewelry, drug paraphernalia, and fake pee for beating a drug test. The store, it turned out, was run by undercover ATF agents. Over the course of its 10-month operation, the agents did not catch any arms traffickers or drug dealers or gangs. They did, however, have over $35,000 in merchandise stolen, lost an ATF machine gun, and tried to get out of $15,000 in utility bills, as well as left holes in walls, overflowed the toilet, and broke doors. All after giving the landlord fake names and no way to contact them to try to get the money. In the end, they charged 30 people. In 3 of those cases, they had the wrong guy and even attempted to charge a man who was already in prison at the time that the ATF claimed that he had sold them weed. They created a Facebook page where they said that they were willing to buy guns and drugs and paid such high prices for guns, trying to nab bad guys, that most people they charged just bought guns from local FFLs and big box stores and then came and sold them to the ATF agents for a profit. They also used 28-year-old Chauncey Wright, a brain-damaged man with low IQ, to promote the store and set up drug and gun deals. They paid him in cigarettes, merchandise, and a minimal amount of money. He was given smokes for riding his bike around the city and handing out flyers to people. He also stocked shelves with shoes, clothes, drug paraphernalia, and auto parts. Over the course of about 7 months, they paid him a whopping $530. His IQ is 54, which is half the normal average American. A competency evaluation found that he functions at about the level of a kindergartner. His girlfriend at the time reported that he would sometimes get lost mid-conversation, talk to people who weren't there, and genuinely believe that the agents were his friends. He also believed that the requests to get drugs and guns for the agents were a requirement of his employment. And by the way, this was not the result of brain damage from drug use or something like that. It was from a drowning incident when he was a baby. And when the operation was shut down because of all the burglaries that they were having, the ATF charged him with federal drug and gun charges that led to the competency evaluation, where even the prosecutors recommended only giving him probation. In the end, he was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest and 4 years of probation. Now, this led the Sentinel to discover that the ATF had similar operations in several major cities across the US, and for some reason had a habit of using men with mental disabilities in all of them, while also providing drugs and alcohol to teenagers. And sometimes even trying to get them to sleep with their targets, which is sketchy as hell. 19-year-old Aaron Key, for example, was a stoner with, again, literal brain damage. He and a friend ended up befriending the owner of a head shop in Portland, Oregon online. The owner, nicknamed Squid, would invite them down to Squid's smoke shop to play Xbox, gave them weed, and even paid them to go get neck tattoos of a squid smoking a joint in order to advertise the store. The young men didn't really want to get the tattoos, but they thought that it would be a condition of their employment, and agents told them that the tattoos would allow them to be lifetime members of the shop. Key's friend, Marquise Glover, who was 18 at the time, also has a low IQ. Like the case with Wright, they were paid a minimal amount of money, cigarettes, and merch to advertise the store and try to bring in gun and drug deals. The young men later learned that it was part of an ATF sting operation called Operation Kraken, something that they learned only when they were arrested and booked into jail on gun, drug, and prostitution charges. To top it off, the courts found that 4 of the ATF's arrests in this particular sting were also of individuals with mental disabilities. And none of the guns bought by agents had been used in a crime, and only 10 of them were stolen. Key was given a year in prison, and Glover was sentenced to only probation, both due to their intellectual functioning. The judge also ordered the ATF to pay to remove Key's tattoo. The agents repeated this same MO in every one of their storefront sting operations across the country. In Wichita, Kansas, for example, ATF agents befriended another mentally disabled man named Tony Bruner. Despite their claims that they didn't know he was disabled, they referred to the 20-year-old as slow-headed. Just like Wright, they hired him to drum up business for the store and set up drug and gun deals. Bruner was on probation, and his probation officer encouraged him to take the job. Like Wright, he was paid in cigarettes, merch, and a minuscule amount of cash. He too has an IQ in the 50s. He was later arrested by his so-called friends on federal gun and drug charges, 100 counts of being a felon in possession, and he was given 3 years in prison. Bruner later told the judge that he thought that he was just doing his job. In court, he said that every time he brought the agents a gun, they gave him a hug. That right there should really tell you something. In Pensacola, they hired a felon, Gary Renaud, to run their fake pawn shop, knowing it would increase the net for both criminals and law-abiding citizens mistakenly selling a gun to a felon. He was later arrested for pointing a gun at someone outside a bar and was only given 6 months and a pat on the back. This was Operation Anything for a Buck. Meanwhile, they ensnared 24-year-old Jeremy Norris, who has an IQ of 76, which is considered borderline intellectual functioning and is still considered to be diminished mental capacity. He wasn't a felon and had no criminal record, but he did put in a local newspaper that he was selling off some of his gun collection as he was unemployed and needed money. The ATF called him up, asked to buy the guns, and brought Renaud with them. They got Norris to sell the guns to Renaud, thinking he was just selling them to a pawn shop. The first time, they did not tell Norris that Renaud was a felon, but they went back, did tell Norris that Renaud had a felony, but emphasized, their close relationship, and bought another gun. They convinced Norris to sell Renaud guns several times, going directly to Norris's house. They called him Little Squirrel, joked that he was, quote, half retarded, and talked amongst themselves about using Norris's desperation against him. Ultimately, citing his low IQ, Norris was only sentenced to probation. Norris was not the only mentally disabled person caught up in Florida either. The state prosecutor chose not to pursue several of the cases in Operation Anything for a Buck due to the suspects' low IQs and mental disabilities. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, agents found a drug addict with brain damage, found he had no knowledge of guns, and in fact the man, whose brain injury was from getting hit by a drunk driver as a child, didn't even know what a machine gun was. So they gave him a hands-on machine gun tutorial that was partially successful, you would say, and then asked him to find and bring them more machine guns. He did eventually find one and bring it to the shop, was arrested, and given 8 years. Another one of the arrests in the New Mexico sting wasn't prosecuted due to his extensive and severe psychiatric history. But remember, despite calling one of these men literally retarded and another one slow, they claimed that they had no idea that any of these men had any mental health issues or intellectual disabilities. They also gave alcohol to teenagers, had agents dress in slutty outfits and flirt with them in exchange for them finding drugs and weapons for the agents. They gave guns to felons in order to, quote, help them bring higher-priced guns in, asking for guns that would fetch them a higher sentence. And in all of these operations, the agents completely destroyed the buildings they were operating in, stiffing the landlords with a bill. They also had guns and merch stolen in pretty much every one of these cases, lied about which agents the guns belonged to, trying to claim that they weren't actually part of the sting operation when, in at least one case, they were the lead agent. And when they left, they had a tendency to leave behind sensitive documents. Hilariously, one of these storefronts was also in Brockton, Massachusetts, and if you're from the South Shore, you know all about Brockton. Oh boy. I do not miss Brockton, but I do miss Cape Cod pizza. They also specifically set up these shops in school zones and near churches to add on to the crimes. And all of the fake stores offered such high prices for guns that they inspired strings of robberies in every location. In some cases, they even told their, quote, employees to have sex with targets, gaining them prostitution charges. One of these so-called informants even turned out to be a wood chipper human. He was in the St. Louis location as part of Operation Hustle City. All of this inspired a 2.5-year probe by the DOJ, which both claimed the ATF wasn't targeting disabled individuals, but also that they were violating disability law. They were given a slap on the wrist and told to create working groups so that agents would know their responsibilities when working with mentally disabled individuals. The ATF, despite some of their admissions on record, again claimed that they never knew any of these people had disabilities, but that even if they did, that these people had the same responsibility to follow the law. But I guess the ATF doesn't need to follow it. They still defended each of their operations and called these storefronts a valuable tool. They said that these storefronts were responsible for reducing crime. Congressional hearings were had, and 4 agents were ultimately given the lightest punishment possible, while others were given mere warnings for their bad behavior. And these are just the ones that we know about. Many of these reports noted that due to the level of disability and sensitive nature of some of the people used in these sting operations or arrested through them, that the records were sealed and are not accessible to the public. Which leads me to believe that this is just the tip of the iceberg and probably tactics that they're still using. So, ladies and gentlemen, add this to the list of reasons why the ATF should not exist. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I know that was a long video and still honestly just scratching the surface of how insane these storefront sting operations really are. But you guys know the drill for all of the algorithm things. Please do them. And as always, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and happy shooting.